Japan's 9.0 megaquake just hid a terrifying truth that has experts stunned, because what really happened on March 11, 2011 wasn't just the deadliest disaster in Japanese history. It was a geological warning that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Picture the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, triggering 30-meter tsunamis that killed over 18,000 people and caused the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear meltdown. But that catastrophic destruction was just the surface of something far more sinister happening deep beneath the Pacific Ocean floor. Here's what has seismologists in complete shock. The Tohoku megaquake didn't just rupture one fault segment, it triggered a cascade of geological changes that are still happening today, 13 years later. The earthquake was so violent, it literally moved Japan 8 feet closer to North America and shifted Earth's axis by 6.5 inches, changing the length of our days forever. But the most terrifying discovery came from deep-sea drilling expeditions that found evidence the megaquake unlocked something that had been dormant for thousands of years. Stress patterns are now spreading across the Pacific Ring of Fire like a geological infection, targeting fault systems from California to Indonesia. Was the Tohoku disaster just a one-time catastrophe, or the first domino in a chain reaction that could trigger megaquakes around the entire Pacific Rim? The answer starts with a look at the moment Japan's defenses failed. Japan's 9.0 megaquake just hit a terrifying truth that has experts stunned, because what really happened on March 11, 2011 wasn't just the deadliest disaster in Japanese history. It was a geological warning that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Picture the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, triggering 30-meter tsunamis that killed over 18,000 people and caused the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. But that catastrophic destruction was just the surface of something far more sinister happening deep beneath the Pacific Ocean floor. Here's what has seismologists in complete shock. The Tohoku megaquake didn't just rupture one fault segment, it triggered a cascade of geological changes that are still happening today, 13 years later. The earthquake was so violent, it literally moved Japan 8 feet closer to North America and shifted Earth's axis by 6.5 inches, changing the length of our days forever. But the most terrifying discovery came from deep-sea drilling expeditions that found evidence the megaquake unlocked something that had been dormant for thousands of years. Stress patterns are now spreading across the Pacific Ring of Fire like a geological infection, targeting fault systems from California to Indonesia. Was the Tohoku disaster just a one-time catastrophe, or the first domino in a chain reaction that could trigger megaquakes around the entire Pacific Rim? At 2:46 p.m. on March 11, 2011, seismic alarms triggered across Japan. Within seconds, the Japan Meteorological Agency's early warning system detected the first tremors and began processing data. Automated alerts sounded in some coastal towns, but the system's algorithm, built to interpret smaller, more typical earthquakes, struggled to calculate the true scale of what was unfolding. The initial warning underestimated both the magnitude and the tsunami threat, predicting waves of just 3 meters, far less than the walls of water racing toward the shore. For millions living along the Tohoku coast, the window between the first warning and the tsunami's arrival was brutally narrow. In many places, only 3 minutes separated the blaring of sirens from the first surge of water. Studies of the alert system's logs show that in towns like Minamisanriku and Rikuzentakata, the public address systems had barely finished their automated announcements before evacuation routes were already cut off. Some residents heard the warning but had no time to reach higher ground. Others never received it at all because power failures and damaged relay towers left gaps in coverage just as the danger peaked. The warning network's reach was further compromised by the physical limits of sound. Research into siren audibility revealed that even under ideal conditions, the alarms could be drowned out by the earthquake's rumble or blocked by buildings. In several districts, local officials later found that less than half the population reported hearing any warning before the tsunami struck. For elderly residents or those living just meters above sea level, the difference between life and death was measured in seconds. The underestimation of the wave height proved catastrophic. Many coastal defenses, including seawalls and evacuation sites, were designed for much smaller tsunamis, based on the agency's historical models. The official forecast, issued in the first minutes after the quake, failed to account for the scale of seafloor displacement that had just occurred offshore. By the time revised warnings were broadcast, communications infrastructure was already failing, and the most vulnerable communities were out of time. Japan's early warning system remains among the most advanced in the world, but on March 11, its limitations were laid bare. The 3-minute window, meant to provide a final chance for survival, was not enough. In the aftermath, investigators traced the gap not to a lack of technology, but to the challenge of predicting the unpredictable, a reality that would haunt every effort to understand what happened next. Concrete defenses lined much of Japan's northeast coast, a testament to decades of engineering aimed at holding back the Pacific. Most seawalls stood 10 meters high, built to withstand tsunamis like those in living memory. On March 11, 2011, those barriers became monuments to a dangerous assumption. The first waves, already higher than the warning models predicted, surged over the top with barely a pause. In Miyako, the water climbed more than 40 meters, swallowing seawalls and entire neighborhoods in minutes. Engineers inspecting the aftermath found sections of reinforced concrete shattered or uprooted, their steel cores bent by forces far beyond design limits. In towns like Ofunado and Kamaishi, breakwaters that had taken years to construct vanished beneath the flood in seconds. Critical infrastructure failed almost as quickly. The tsunami's reach extended far inland, flooding power substations and shorting out backup generators. At the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, the loss of all electrical power, known as a station blackout, set off a chain of failures that would soon become a global crisis. Across the Tohoku region, hospitals lost emergency lighting, water pumps stopped working, and communications networks fell silent. In Sendai, mobile phone service collapsed as towers lost power or were physically toppled. For days, survivors struggled to contact relatives or emergency services. Maps of the disaster zone show entire swaths where GPS signals and cellular coverage disappeared, cutting off both rescue teams and those trapped by debris. Rail lines and highways, engineered to strict seismic codes, buckled under landslides and liquefied earth. Bridges designed to flex with earthquakes were twisted out of alignment or simply swept away. Ports that had served as evacuation hubs filled with wreckage, their breakwaters breached and navigation systems destroyed. Even the Shinkansen, the pride of Japanese rail technology, was paralyzed, with 11 trains stranded between stations and all service suspended for days. For all the advanced planning, the scale and speed of the disaster exposed the limits of human design. The physical failures of seawalls, backup systems, and communication grids turned a natural catastrophe into a technological collapse. In the aftermath, engineering societies across Japan launched urgent reviews, questioning not just the height of barriers or the strength of concrete, but the very idea that nature's extremes could be reliably predicted and contained. Japan's 9.0 megaquake just hid a terrifying truth that has experts stunned. Because what really happened on March 11, 2011, wasn't just the deadliest disaster in Japanese history, it was a geological warning that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Beneath the Pacific, the fault line east of Tohoku gave way in a rupture that defied every expectation. Over a span of 500 kilometers, the seabed tore open with a violence never before recorded in Japan. Seafloor GPS acoustic measurements tracked the movement in real time. Entire sections of the plate boundary shifted as much as 50 meters in a matter of minutes. This was not a single break, but a chain reaction across multiple fault segments, each failing in rapid succession. The rupture raced north to south, then east to west, covering an area roughly the size of Massachusetts and Connecticut combined. Finite fault models reconstructed the sequence with chilling clarity. The initial break started deep, but within seconds the rupture front accelerated, reaching velocities up to 7 kilometers per second, faster than most earthquakes ever observed. The energy released was so immense that it overwhelmed the mechanical barriers that usually confine such events. Where previous models had predicted smaller staggered slips, the data revealed a seamless cascade, with 3 main slip patches designated S1, S2, and S3, each unleashing extraordinary force. In some regions, the shallowest parts of the fault, closest to the trench, slipped the farthest, contradicting decades of seismic theory. Seafloor deformation mirrored the rupture's complexity. GPS acoustic data showed abrupt vertical jumps, confirming that the largest displacements occurred just offshore. The shallow slip, previously thought to be limited by unconsolidated sediments, instead produced the most dramatic movement. This was the source of the towering tsunami, as the ocean floor lurched upward and outward, displacing unimaginable volumes of water in seconds. Independent geophysicists tasked with modeling the event found themselves recalibrating their assumptions. One modeler staring at the raw slip distribution described it as a kinematic shock, a rupture that seemed to ignore the rules. The fault had not just failed, it had redefined what a subduction zone could do. The question that haunted researchers was simple: what allowed such catastrophic motion to unfold, and could it happen elsewhere? Answers would soon emerge from deep beneath the sea floor, where the true mechanics of the rupture were waiting to be uncovered. Japan's 9.0 megaquake just hid a terrifying truth that has experts stunned. Because what really happened on March 11, 2011, wasn't just the deadliest disaster in Japanese history. It was a geological warning that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Picture the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, triggering 30-meter tsunamis that killed over 18,000 people and caused the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. But that catastrophic destruction was just the surface of something far more sinister happening deep beneath the Pacific Ocean floor. 1 year after the disaster, a team of geologists and engineers aboard the research vessel Chikyu set out to answer a question that had stumped the world's top seismologists. What allowed the Tōhoku fault to slip so far, so fast? Their target lay nearly 7 kilometers beneath the Pacific, just off the coast of Miyagi Prefecture. This was the heart of the rupture zone, where the seafloor had moved up to 50 meters in a single violent surge. The Japan Trench Fast Drilling Project, called JFAST, was tasked with reaching the fault itself, drilling through unstable sediments and fractured rock to recover the first ever core samples from the site of a megaquake. As the drill bit punched through layers of ancient clay and volcanic ash, every meter brought scientists closer to the zone where 2 tectonic plates had slid past each other with almost unimaginable force. The major breakthrough came when the core barrels returned to the surface, packed with a thin, grayish layer, less than 5 meters thick, of finely ground clay. Under the microscope, this clay revealed a secret that changed earthquake science overnight. Laboratory tests showed the clay had a friction coefficient of 0.08, far lower than ordinary rock. In practical terms, the clay acted like a natural lubricant, allowing the Pacific plate to glide beneath Japan with almost no resistance. The fault zone, instead of grinding to a halt, had slipped freely, unleashing the catastrophic tsunami. But the surprises did not stop at mineralogy. Temperature sensors lowered into the borehole recorded a spike that stunned the JFAST team. The fault had reached nearly 700 degrees Celsius during the rupture, hot enough to alter the structure of the clay itself. This intense heat, generated in seconds by the friction of the sliding plates, drove off water trapped in the minerals, creating a process called thermal pressurization. The effect was explosive. Pore water pressure rose so rapidly that it further reduced friction, transforming the fault into a near-frictionless plane. Dr. Harold Tobin, the project lead scientist, described the results as the smoking gun for why the Tohoku quake defied expectations. The combination of ultra-low friction clay and extreme heat explained how the fault could slip up to 50 meters, more than twice what most models allowed. These findings forced a fundamental rethink of tsunami risk in subduction zones worldwide. The JFAST cores, extracted from deep beneath the seabed, revealed that the most devastating earthquakes may depend not just on tectonic stress, but on the hidden chemistry and physics of the fault itself. A battered fishing boat, torn from its harbor in Kesennuma, drifted for months across the Pacific. When it finally washed ashore near Oregon, it carried more than memories of a vanished coastline. Embedded in its hull were barnacles and seaweed never before recorded on American shores. Scientists traced the journey of this and thousands of other objects, part of an estimated 1.5 million tons of debris swept out to sea by the tsunami. Ocean current models showed the debris fanning out across the North Pacific, with some pieces circling for years before landfall. On the beaches of California and British Columbia, volunteers and marine biologists began finding fragments of homes, fishing gear, even entire docks. But the real surprise came in the form of life clinging to the wreckage. Japanese coastal species, from sea stars to kelp, survived the transoceanic crossing. Over 280 non-native species were documented on tsunami debris, a biological invasion on a scale never seen before. Some species, like the Asian shore crab and wakame seaweed, took root in their new environments, threatening to disrupt local ecosystems. Analysis of the debris revealed not just foreign organisms, but traces of radioactive isotopes carried from the waters near Fukushima. The Pacific's vastness offered no barrier, as currents and wind and the relentless spread of the debris field connected two continents in the disaster's wake. For survivors on both sides of the ocean, the aftermath of March 11, 2011, became a story written not just in loss, but in the altered currents of the sea and the arrival of uninvited guests. More than 200,000 people remain in temporary housing. 13 years after the disaster, their lives paused in prefabricated units and makeshift communities. For many, the sense of home vanished overnight, replaced by uncertainty, isolation, and the daily grind of waiting for a future that still has not arrived. Health surveys in the hardest-hit prefectures reveal a sharp increase in depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. Clinical psychologists working in temporary shelters describe children startled by loud noises, adults haunted by dreams of water and darkness, and families fractured by the strain of displacement. The numbers tell part of the story. Suicide rates in affected areas climbed more than 20% above the national average in the years following the earthquake. Interviews with local doctors and social workers point to a growing crisis of loneliness, especially among elderly survivors who lost both homes and social networks. Community ties that once provided support were severed by evacuation orders and by the scattering of entire neighborhoods. Economically, the burden is staggering. Official estimates put direct damage and reconstruction costs at over $235 billion, more than Japan's annual defense budget. Economic analysts warn that the true figure, including lost productivity and ongoing mental health care, is far higher. The trauma of March 11th lingers not only in the landscape, but in the minds and finances of a nation still searching for stability. Japan's 9.0 megaquake just hid a terrifying truth that has experts stunned, because what really happened on March 11, 2011, wasn't just the deadliest disaster in Japanese history. It was a geological warning that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Leaked reactor logs from Fukushima Daiichi tell a different story than the official press conferences. Within hours of the tsunami, engineers on site realized that 3 reactor cores were overheating beyond control, but public statements downplayed the scale of the damage for days. One former nuclear engineer later testified before a government panel, describing containment pressures spiking while backup systems failed one by one. Behind closed doors, managers debated whether to vent radioactive steam or risk a full meltdown. The exclusion zone now stretches over 1,150 square kilometers, a silent reminder of decisions made in crisis. 13 years later, radioactive water continues to seep into the Pacific, with daily releases measured in hundreds of tons. Whistleblower accounts and internal documents reveal a pattern of secrecy, critical contamination data withheld from both local officials and international agencies, leaving entire communities in the dark about the true risks that linger. Japan's 9.0 megaquake just hit a terrifying truth that has experts stunned, because what really happened on March 11, 2011, wasn't just the deadliest disaster in Japanese history. It was a geological warning that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Seismic records from around the Pacific tell a story that few expected. In the decade after the Tohoku disaster, the number of magnitude 6 and above earthquakes in the region jumped by nearly 300%. Fault systems once thought to be isolated began showing signs of agitation, with clusters of strong tremors rippling from Alaska to Chile. The data caught the attention of international risk analyst Dr. Yuko Kaneko, who warns that the Pacific Ring of Fire is now in a state of heightened alert. According to government forecasts, there is a 70% chance the Nankai Trough, just south of Tokyo, will generate a megaquake within the next 30 years. Some computer models even suggest that changes in ocean currents triggered by the seabed shift could influence global climate patterns. For emergency planners worldwide, the lesson is clear. The risks unleashed by Tohoku do not stop at Japan's shores. Today, seismic stress from that rupture still migrates across the Pacific, quietly reshaping risk maps from California to Indonesia. Over $500 billion in decontamination bills and radioactive water releases continue, reminders that the fallout is far from over. As the Ring of Fire grows more restless, the question is not if another megaquake will strike, but whether we will heed the warning before the next fault gives way. What are we willing to risk ignoring?